This story is an adaptation based on Melissa's story. My name is Melissa. I'm 21 years old, and I work at a Walmart outside a small town in Alabama. Back when the store still operated 24 hours a day, I mostly worked overnight shifts because I wasn't attending college full-time. My usual schedule was 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. Since it was a supercenter, there were always at least a handful of employees scattered throughout the building during the night shift. Usually a couple cashiers up front, a few stock workers, and maybe a manager hiding somewhere in the back offices. The store sat out in the countryside, so business during those hours was usually dead. Overnight was mainly for restocking shelves and cleaning the store before morning. That night started like any other. I was folding jeans in the men's clothing section while listening to music through one earbud. Most managers didn't care as long as the work got done. Around 11:30 p.m., a customer walked into the aisle and asked if we had a pair of jeans in another waist size. I apologized and told him whatever was on the rack was all we had left. He thanked me politely enough. But as he stood there putting the jeans back, we accidentally made eye contact. Something about the way he stared at me made me uncomfortable. I ignored it and kept working. A couple hours passed, and the store slowly emptied out until it felt like a giant abandoned warehouse. You could look down entire aisles without seeing another person. By around 1 a.m., I'd moved over to the appliance section. I was stocking coffee makers and microwaves from a rolling pallet cart when I noticed movement in the aisle beside me. Since most of the shelves were half empty, I could see clearly between them. Someone was watching me. The moment he realized I noticed him, he quickly looked away. But I recognized his face instantly. Trying not to make it obvious, I pushed my cart farther down the aisle and casually glanced over. He wasn't carrying a basket, a cart, or even a single item. No one shops for 2 hours without picking up anything. Something felt seriously wrong. I quickly finished stocking the shelves and brought the empty cart back to the storage area behind the sales floor. Honestly, I just wanted to get away from him for a while. I sat in the employee lounge scrolling through my phone, trying to convince myself I was overreacting. Eventually I figured I should get back to work, but I decided to switch departments and work grocery instead. I went into the dairy cooler and started loading crates with milk, yogurt, and butter while checking expiration dates. The industrial refrigerators were so loud in there that you could barely hear yourself think. Then suddenly, the cooler door slammed open. I looked up through a narrow gap between stacked boxes on a pallet. And I swear to God, it was him. The same man. Standing inside the employees-only cooler. Pure panic hit me instantly. I ducked behind one of the metal racks and pulled a large box of eggs in front of me. The refrigerator fans were loud enough to cover any noise I made. At that point, I already believed this guy had been following me around the store. But seeing him walk into an employee-only area, I knew something bad was about to happen. I stayed crouched there with my head down, waiting to hear the cooler door open and close again. But it never did. After what felt like forever, I sprinted out of the cooler and nearly crashed into another employee stocking shelves nearby. His name tag said Eric. I grabbed him and started yelling for help. Then, unbelievably, the man calmly walked out of the cooler behind me and apologized like nothing had happened. He claimed he was from corporate. According to him, he'd been secretly checking overnight employees to make sure nobody was slacking off. Eric actually looked like he believed him. I immediately asked why he tried covering my mouth. The man smiled awkwardly and claimed he was only trying to stop me from causing a scene. Then he casually told me to finish stocking appliances before walking away down the aisle. Before he disappeared, I shouted after him, "What's your name?" Without turning around, he answered, "David." Then he vanished. The next day, I spoke directly with one of the store managers and asked whether someone from corporate named David had visited overnight. She immediately said no. Not only was nobody from corporate scheduled to visit, but no corporate employee would ever randomly show up at 2 a.m. without management knowing. They reviewed the security footage and immediately contacted police. The cameras showed the man wandering the store for hours without buying a single thing. Worse, they captured him repeatedly following me between aisles throughout my shift. After that night, I refused to work overnight ever again. I still work there now, but only during the daytime. If you've ever been inside a Walmart late at night, then you already know you'll probably see at least one person acting completely insane. But what happened to me went way beyond weird. It was the Thursday night before Black Friday. The store was staying open extra late, and around 11 p.m. I went there hoping to grab a discounted laptop before the huge crowd showed up the next morning. By pure luck, I found the last one sitting on the shelf. The second I picked it up, this massive dirty-looking guy suddenly walked over to me. He smelled horrible. Greasy hair. Torn hoodie. Wild eyes. He immediately started insisting that he needed the laptop more than I did. I nervously laughed and told him it was the last one. That's when he snapped. He started yelling at me right there in electronics, making a huge scene in front of everyone nearby. The guy clearly wasn't mentally stable. My heart was pounding because I'm not used to confrontations like that. People around us stared while I quickly walked away with the laptop box toward the checkout lines. The man kept screaming after me the entire way. Even some customers in line joked about how insane the guy was, trying to calm me down. Eventually I paid and drove home. By the time I got there, everyone in my house was already asleep. I sat outside near our backyard pool to start setting up the laptop when the motion light beside the house suddenly flicked on. That wasn't super unusual. We had woods next to our property, so animals triggered the light all the time. Still, it creeped me out enough to make me head back inside. A few minutes later, my car alarm suddenly exploded outside. I recognized it immediately as my Cadillac. I looked through the front window and saw the lights flashing. I ran upstairs to grab my keys and tried shutting off the alarm remotely, but it wouldn't stop. So I stepped outside onto the porch and manually disabled it. That's when I noticed a car parked across the street. It definitely hadn't been there earlier. And in our neighborhood, random cars parked on the road stood out immediately because everyone had huge driveways. As I stared at the car, I realized someone was sitting inside, watching my house. I went back inside and locked the door. Then I woke up my mom and told her I thought someone outside might be dangerous. My dad wasn't home that night, so it was just me, my mom, and my little sister. My mom followed me downstairs and carefully peeked through the peephole. Then she gasped and covered her mouth. I looked through it next, and nearly threw up. The huge man from Walmart was standing right outside our front door. I whispered to my mom, he followed me home. Suddenly the doorknob started turning violently. The man tried opening the door. When it didn't work, he began pounding on it hard enough to shake the walls. My younger sister came running out of her room crying while my mom called 911. Then everything went silent. For several minutes, the only sound in the house was my mom speaking to the emergency operator. Then came a loud crash from downstairs. A window shattered in the den. My mom and sister screamed. I told them to run upstairs while I locked the den door from the hallway. I stood there waiting for the man to slam into it. But nothing happened. Then suddenly I heard police sirens outside. The response time was unbelievably fast. I ran outside and led officers toward the den where the window had been broken. Inside, they found the man crouched behind our couch. He was arrested immediately. The entire time officers dragged him outside, he screamed threats and insults at me non-stop. One of the cops later told us the guy appeared heavily intoxicated or high on drugs. Either way, he wasn't coming back. So yeah. People joke about the weird customers you see at Walmart. But sometimes the scariest people in society are wandering those aisles too. Back when I was finishing college, I worked weekends as an overnight stalker at Walmart to help pay off my student loans. The shifts were brutal. Usually 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. The upside was I rarely had to deal with customers. Most of my job involved unloading deliveries, stocking shelves, and organizing inventory after the store closed. But one night in July of 2015 changed the way I looked at those empty stores forever. I still remember the exact date. July 9th. Around the middle of my shift, I was stocking shelves in electronics when I noticed someone walk past the end of the aisle out of the corner of my eye. Normally that wouldn't matter. Except there were only 3 employees working that night. Me, Tyler, and Marcus. And we were all wearing bright blue staff shirts. The person I saw was dressed entirely in black. I immediately walked to the end of the aisle and peeked around the corner. Nobody. I called out Tyler and Marcus's names, but neither answered. I tried brushing it off and went back to work. A few minutes later, a loud crash echoed from somewhere deeper in the store. The sound startled me badly enough that I dropped what I was holding. I ran toward the noise and found a bicycle lying on the floor in sporting goods. It had been ripped completely off the display hook. The hook itself wasn't broken. Someone would have had to physically yank the bike down. At that point I knew someone else was inside the building. I slowly walked farther toward the back aisles. Then I heard it. Laughing. Not normal laughter. This weird high-pitched wheezing sound that echoed through the store. It sounded like it came from the very next aisle over. I hurried around the corner. And froze. A man dressed completely in black stood at the far end of the aisle with his back toward me. But his head was twisted just enough so I could see half of his face staring directly at me. Then he suddenly sprinted away. Not toward me. Away. His footsteps echoed through the aisles while that horrible laughing continued somewhere in the distance. At that point, I had 2 choices. Chase him. Or find my co-workers. I chose the smarter option. As I searched the store, the laughing kept echoing around me like whoever it was kept circling nearby without letting me actually see him. Eventually I found Tyler folding clothes in women's apparel. I told him there was someone inside the store who definitely wasn't supposed to be there. We didn't even have walkie-talkies that night, so I told him to warn Marcus if he found him first. Then I made the mistake of going to the bathroom alone. The employee restroom was located near the warehouse in the back of the building. I stepped into one of the stalls and sat down. A moment later, the bathroom door creaked open. With only a few people inside the building, I casually called out. "Who's there?" No answer. Then I heard that same horrible laughter again. A shadow slowly appeared beneath the stall door. I looked toward the crack beside the stall door just as someone leaned down and stared directly at me through it. One eye. That's all I could see. Just one eye staring into the stall. Then came whispering. I couldn't understand a single word, but hearing it echo around the tiled bathroom made it 10 times worse. That's when I remembered I had Tyler's number saved in my phone. I called him instantly and practically shouted into the phone for him to get to the bathroom immediately. While I stayed on the line, the figure outside the stall slowly stepped away. Then I heard footsteps sprinting out of the bathroom. About 30 seconds later, Tyler came rushing in. He said he hadn't seen anyone on the way there. Neither of us had any idea where the man could have gone. Since there was no security working overnight, nobody could even check the cameras until morning. I stayed beside Tyler for the rest of the shift after that. The next afternoon, my manager texted me back after reviewing everything. According to him, every security camera in the store had turned to static sometime during the night. Nobody knew why. Nobody had shut them off manually. And because there was no footage proving a break-in, there wasn't much police could do. To this day, that remains the single creepiest night shift I've ever worked. And honestly, I still think about that laughing sometimes. This story is an adaptation of the story of Joanne, who lives in Illinois. A few years ago, I worked the night shift at a medium-sized hotel in my hometown. My job was simple for the most part. I stood behind the front desk checking guests in and out, answering phone calls, and making sure nothing went wrong during the night. Usually, though, almost nobody came through the lobby after midnight. Most guests stayed in their rooms, and the few people who did pass through barely even acknowledged me. Honestly, most nights were painfully boring. I'd spend hours staring at the automatic doors while the rain or traffic moved outside. Of course, I dealt with the occasional rude guest or weird customer, but one particular night still stands out in my mind years later. It had been a completely normal shift at first. There was a massive storm moving through town that night, and heavy rain slammed against the hotel windows non-stop. Weather like that usually guaranteed an empty lobby because nobody wanted to be outside unless they absolutely had to. Around midnight, I pulled out my phone to pass the time. That's when I noticed a man standing outside the entrance. He walked through the first set of glass doors but stopped in the small area between the outer and inner entrances. He just stood there silently, staring through the glass into the lobby. Looking around. Watching. After a few seconds, he made awkward eye contact with me before patting down his pockets and slowly walking back out into the storm. It was strange. But working in a hotel had exposed me to so many awkward people over the years that I tried not to think much of it. I assumed maybe he forgot his keycard in his car or something. I should mention, though, I had never seen him before. Not unusual considering most guests checked in during the daytime, but still, something about him felt off. He also wasn't carrying luggage or bags of any kind. A few minutes later, the phone on the desk rang. The caller ID showed an outside number. I answered with the usual hotel greeting and asked how I could help. A man politely explained that he'd parked in the front lot and needed help bringing in his luggage. That alone wasn't too weird. But then he asked if I could come outside and help him carry a small suitcase. Immediately, I felt uneasy. I told him that if he pulled his vehicle up to the entrance, I'd gladly help him from there so we wouldn't have to stand out in the rain. There was a long pause. Then he quietly said, "Okay," before hanging up. I walked around the desk and waited near the entrance doors. 5 minutes passed. Nobody came. Finally, getting annoyed, I cracked open the outer door and peeked outside. Rain poured across the parking lot in thick sheets. And standing far across the lot was the same man from earlier. He was waving at me, motioning for me to walk over to him. A horrible feeling settled into my stomach. The entire reason I told him to pull up front was so neither of us would have to walk through the storm. Why was he insisting I come out there? I ignored him and went back behind the desk. If he truly needed help, he could drive closer. The second I sat down, the entrance doors burst open. The man hurried into the lobby breathing heavily. Considering how far away he'd been in the parking lot, he must have sprinted through the rain to get inside that quickly. This time, he walked all the way up to the desk. Again, he asked me to help him with his suitcase. I calmly repeated myself, saying he needed to pull his vehicle closer first. That's when his expression changed. He suddenly looked irritated. He told me he'd already removed the luggage from his car and didn't want it getting wetter outside. At that point, every alarm bell in my head was going off. I asked him whether he even had a room at the hotel because I'd need to check him in before helping further. The man instantly became angry. Like genuinely angry. As if I'd offended him somehow. He demanded that I come outside immediately before his luggage got ruined. That was enough for me. I finally snapped back and told him if he cared so much about the suitcase staying dry, maybe he shouldn't have left it sitting in the middle of a parking lot during a thunderstorm. Then I told him if he refused to check in, he needed to leave. He glared at me for a second before flipping me off and storming back outside. I never saw him again. The next morning, I told the day staff what happened. That's when it fully hit me. The man had never been a guest at the hotel. He was just some random stranger trying to lure me outside into a dark parking lot during a stormy night. And I still don't know what would have happened if I walked out there. I don't usually take road trips. If I need to travel somewhere far away, I'd much rather fly. But a few years ago, after a family member suddenly passed away, I had no choice but to drive nearly 10 hours to my cousin's house for the funeral. I packed enough clothes to last about a week and left early the next morning. At first, the drive was easy. But several hours in, dark storm clouds began forming ahead of me. An hour later, I was driving through one of the worst rainstorms I'd ever seen. The road stretched through endless fields and isolated forests, and some sections dipped low enough that rainwater completely flooded portions of the highway. At one point, the road ahead was underwater. I had to turn around because there was no way I was risking my car getting stuck in the middle of nowhere. The detour added hours to my drive. By the time evening arrived, I was exhausted. I'd already been on the road close to 8 hours, and I still had another 5 to go. Between the darkness and the heavy rain, I could barely keep my eyes open anymore. I knew I needed to stop somewhere and rest. After nearly 45 minutes of fighting sleep, I finally came across a tiny rural town. And when I say tiny, I mean maybe 20 buildings total. A grocery store. A gas station. A few scattered houses. That was it. I drove around searching for a motel, but there wasn't one. The only place I could really stop was the parking lot of the grocery store, so I parked in the farthest corner beneath a flickering streetlight. The town felt dead silent. No cars. No people. Most buildings were completely dark. Honestly, the place felt creepy, but I locked my doors, leaned my seat back, and convinced myself it was safer than sleeping on the side of an empty highway. The rain hammered against the roof of my car as I slowly drifted off. I woke. As I looked around groggily, I noticed movement in the distance. Someone was walking through the parking lot, toward my car. At first, I assumed they'd turn or head somewhere else. But they didn't. The closer they got, the clearer it became that they were heading directly for me. Rain poured so heavily that it blurred everything outside, but once the figure got close enough, I could finally tell it was a man. What immediately unsettled me was the fact that he didn't seem bothered by the storm at all. No umbrella. No jacket over his head. Nothing. He simply walked through the rain staring at my vehicle. Once he reached the back of my car, I braced for him to try opening the doors. Instead, he placed both hands flat against the trunk and started pushing. Not trying to break in. Trying to physically push my entire car. At first, I genuinely thought I was dreaming. The man leaned harder against the vehicle like he was desperately trying to shove it across the parking lot. That's when I realized something was seriously wrong with him. I quickly shoved my key into the ignition and started the engine. The headlights flashed on. But the man didn't react. He just kept pushing. Slowly, I backed out of the parking spot. For several seconds, he actually followed the moving car while keeping his hands pressed against it. Then he finally let go. I watched him through the mirror as I drove away. He stood motionless in the rain for a few moments before calmly walking back into the darkness from where he came. I didn't stop driving again until I reached my cousin's house. And even now, I still have no idea what that man was trying to do. I grew up in a remote part of Washington state. At the time this happened, I lived with my parents in a small house surrounded by miles of forest. The nearest town was about 20 minutes away, and our closest neighbors lived nearly half a mile in either direction. That kind of isolation was normal where we lived. I'd spent my entire childhood there, so the quiet never really bothered me. Until one night during spring break when I was 14. My parents had originally planned a family trip to Florida, and we were supposed to leave Sunday morning for the airport. But a couple days beforehand, something happened at my dad's job that forced him to cancel the trip entirely. I was upset about it, so my parents tried making it up to me by taking me to a water park instead. We spent most of the day there. But late that afternoon, massive storm clouds rolled in fast. Within minutes, everyone started leaving as thunder rumbled overhead. By the time we got home, the storm was brutal. Rain pounded the roof, lightning flashed constantly through the trees, and thunder shook the entire house. As we pulled into the driveway, my dad immediately noticed the garage door standing wide open. He assumed he'd accidentally left it that way. But my mom insisted she remembered watching it fully close before we left earlier that morning. Still, nothing else looked wrong. We all went inside while my mom closed the garage from the wall button. My parents settled into the living room while I headed upstairs toward my bedroom. Halfway up the stairs, I suddenly thought I heard movement somewhere down the hallway. I stopped. The rain outside was so loud that I couldn't tell whether I actually heard something or imagined it. Trying not to freak myself out, I continued upstairs. That's when I noticed my bedroom light was on. I froze. I knew for a fact I hadn't left it on earlier. I barely even used that light during the daytime. At first I tried convincing myself I'd simply forgotten. But something about it felt wrong. I stood outside my room listening carefully. For several seconds, everything was silent. Then I heard faint shuffling noises inside. Very quiet. Like something slowly moving around. My first thought was that maybe an animal had gotten into the house somehow. I slowly cracked the bedroom door open. Nothing looked disturbed. No mess. No knocked over furniture. No sign of an animal anywhere. Eventually, I stepped inside. I checked beneath my bed and around the closet but found nothing. Finally, I sat down on the edge of my bed trying to calm myself down. Then suddenly, a shadow moved across the gap beneath my bedroom door. Someone was standing in the hallway outside. My entire body locked up in fear. The shadow was way too large to be an animal. It was definitely a person. I immediately grabbed my phone and texted my dad. "Someone is upstairs." The message instantly showed as read. A few seconds later, I heard my dad running up the stairs. I opened the bedroom door and whispered what I saw. Even my dad suddenly looked nervous. Together, we slowly walked back down the hallway toward the stairs. The second we reached the bottom floor, a loud thud echoed upstairs. Then came fast footsteps sprinting down the hallway above us. My dad grabbed a small baseball bat from the living room corner just as someone tore down the staircase at full speed. A second later, the front door slammed open. We rushed around the corner just in time to see a man running into the storm outside. My dad called 911 immediately. Because of how isolated our house was, deputies didn't arrive for almost 30 minutes. They searched the woods and questioned all of us, but they never found the man. Later, the police suggested the intruder may have known we were supposed to leave for vacation that morning and expected the house to be empty. That idea terrified me more than the break-in itself. Because it meant whoever entered our home was probably someone who knew our family personally. And honestly, that realization still scares me more than the man upstairs ever did.